I'll open the Establishment Committee meeting for the 30th of September. Welcome Andrew and Electra. I think we may have a few others join, so I'll let them trickle in. And
sorry, Joni, my Fireflies note taker, my AI note taker has joined itself.
Welcome, Fireflies.
How to remove it.
Look at that AI having a mind of its own. That's okay though.
It's joining without me asking it to now.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any issues, and perhaps anybody. Yeah, if anybody does have issues, just let us know in the chat. The discussion today is to really continue what was raised in our community call earlier. So with the regulatory engagement starting with the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, you know, this is premised around LawFi DAO commencing as an unincorporated association and seeking to incorporate, and the nature of the request to ASIC was really, you know, there's section 115 of the Corporations Act which prevents an unincorporated association forming or persons being involved in the formation of such an association where there's profit or gain for the members and more than 20 members. And how does this conflict or how is it interpreted in the context of the pecuniary benefits that can flow to members under the State-Based Association Incorporations Act? Because if some level of pecuniary benefit is allowed when you incorporate at the state level, does that make it an illegal entity at the federal level, and which takes priority? So that's the key crux of the discussion, and with at least the LawFi DAO proposed pay-to-rely model as the subject of scrutiny, this is where LawFi DAO is the public good platform, so to speak, through which members can offer their services. Now, one of the exempted types of pecuniary benefits is where a member is providing goods and services and is being remunerated for that.
Directly.
So,
directly, not through any kind of agency as the DAO.
Well, and this is the thing, if the DAO actually facilitates the smart contract architecture that the member can link in with, is it still going through the DAO if the DAO is governing those smart contracts? So we'll get into what that means and where the borderlines perhaps could be drawn. ASIC doesn't give legal advice, so there'll be only so much that we can stretch in terms of what they're willing to provide guidance on. So on a related note, I've started reaching out to lawyers and law firms to ask, in preparation for more of maybe a formal tender process or request going out for pro bono legal support. And also asking, you know, if a lawyer is willing to provide pro bono support, are they also willing to do it as a group? So perhaps not just the one law firm gets the glory or the burden of assisting in this exercise, really trying to test this peer review and community model of Electra, as you said. Can we get to that 1,000 member consensus?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of spreads the risk of it too. If it's a panel, it's more like a discussion trying to reach some kind of consensus rather than direct advice, is it?
And so we would still need one of the law firms to write the legal advice and legal opinion, which the LawFi DAO members, or at least the executive body, could rely on, if it's the executive body that are the officers and that would be bear the brunt of any sort of legal claim. But no, you're right. It's once we've got that legal opinion, it's almost testing the peer review process. How does another law firm say, I endorse this opinion, or do I want to write my own? How do we go about getting consensus amongst lawyers? So we'll test that. We'll see. We'll see. But it's really just to say that the advice on the Corporations Act or upon any law needs to be given by a lawyer. This is something that I am capable and could do, but am almost conflicted. I'm not independent because am the one sort of advocating for the idea. So we need to have a level of independent legal advice too. Welcome, Miles, and welcome, Nathan. So actually, Nathan, one of the other things that came up is this. There was some scam or malicious airdropped tokens into the LawFi DAO Treasury wallet in the last week. And I saw them and I've notified the treasurer, the other person on the multi-sig straight away. Don't engage with it, don't visit the websites. But the question came up, if we had engaged an organisation like ZeroCap to help us manage our treasury functions, with your use of the Fireblocks software, would it and have enabled that sort of notification process of incoming things, and we approve them before they actually go into the wallet? How do you know how that would work? Sorry to catch you on the spot. You can take it on notice if you like.
No. That's all right. At a simple level, with any wallet, you can determine who you send it to and how you send it and who can accept the sending. And that's MPC or multi-sig, whatever. But in no way can you ever prevent something from coming in, full stop.
Not even with Fireblocks. Yeah.
No. So even now, we often have traders, the settlement team asking us what's this token? What is it? How does it work? Why are we receiving it? Because you can receive airdrops, random tokens, whatever happens, you don't pay a gas fee, it just comes in, right? There's no way around that, unfortunately. So the only way I'd say we could do it is by probably creating either manually or automatically. No, it wouldn't work automatically because we have MPC, but manually a process where whenever a scam token comes in, once a week, the treasurer can just burn them all. So we can just have a list that we can append to of tokens that we accept to be in the treasury, and everything else can be burnt.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, because it is, we would in no way want any of our members or people checking the LawFi DAO Treasury wallet to see, oh, it's in the LawFi DAO Treasury wallet, therefore it's fine and it's great.
Yeah. So then what we can also do is probably add it to the website. Like most VCs, they often the website often has a page of what we've invested in. We can do something similar so that if something's airdropped into our wallet, then we have a process that people who are aware of how we run the treasury can say, this isn't what we wanted to buy. This isn't how we're diversifying our portfolio. So this isn't really a good investment. Yeah,
that's right. No, good feedback. Okay, well then might take that offline and develop some of those communications with you, and we'll update the website. I was also cautious of sharing it on the website too, because of that line of thought of not giving it any more air, the project any more air. But you're right, we've got to strike the balance somehow and at least tell them these are what we are. We don't necessarily have to define what we don't like.
Exactly.
We do. Yeah.
And then on that note, there's heaps of issues around that just in the community for NFTs and crypto, where on a website like Nansen, a data analytics firm for the blockchain, people just set up a bot that tracks transactions in and out with these wallets that are deemed smart money, and whatever they do, they just follow. So what scammers have started doing is sending the tokens into these wallets, seeing it pump because everyone just automatically buys it, and then dumping it afterwards. That's just an inevitability. We can't stop that. If someone decides that we are one of those wallets that have a smart way of approaching stability, I guess, in crypto, well then, so be it. They're taking the risk, right? You assume that if they're doing it and they're making money, they're more right than they're wrong. So, it pretty much is a situation of our members know. If people are speculating on the outside, it isn't our fault, which sounds bad, but we can't control that because it's all transparent.
And so it brings us to the point of which is also an establishment related thing, you know, disclosure documents as they are and not really easily engaged with by the everyday person. So how can we make it snappy, prominent, easy to identify the key risks, you know, from time to time and notify members. So that this will allow us to go through that process too. Just on the increase of scam and malicious airdrops though, and sort of these pump and dump activities that are occurring around them, there's again the CFTC, the SEC this time, they recently pursued hydro tokens as meeting the Howey test as a form of investment contract. So even though the act of airdropping may not seem an investment, the raising of an investment activity, they did actually look through to the broad scheme where not all of the supply was airdropped, but the airdrop had the effect of increasing demand. Then the founders sold some of the supply by way of raising funds into the Treasury to conduct their activities. So they're now getting more sophisticated to look at the constituent parts of a broad scheme used to pump a token, raise some money, and also attempts, quite contrived attempts to get around the application of regulation.
Yeah, well, on that note, I'd love your take on this, Jenny, and anyone else who's heard about it. But with the CFTC, they're suing of Ooki DAO. Because that's a prime example of saying, oh, we're decentralized and therefore regulations don't apply to us. And they're pretty much like, hey, that's not how it works. And then on top of that, they're saying that they said that every member of the DAO who voted in the proposal is now liable.
It's scary. It came up very briefly on our community call, and I was saying that it's gotten all of us Web3 lawyers in a flurry because, and I think it's worthy of more deep dive discussion in this group. I feel that what really triggered the aggressive action from the CFTC was three things. The Ooki DAO and the Ooki protocol is a successor DAO and protocol to BZX. BZX is sort of like a liquidity pool for margin trading, and they suffered an attack. There was about $50 million worth of value lost by the users of BZX. They went through a rebrand to Ooki DAO and Ooki protocol, and the founder or the key people involved in Ooki DAO marketed on two specific bases: that because they were sufficiently decentralized, regulations such as AML/CTF did not apply, and that secondly, that was a feature to bring people to this protocol, that you can not have to worry about KYC, and this is something that would, you know, and with the history of what happened with the loss, that actually that this was a benefit and a feature. And I think I suspect this really got the CFTC's hairs raised, because it all through the complaint they keep saying the reason for regulation is to segregate customer accounts, to have transparent disclosure around and robust, resilient cybersecurity requirements when you're providing a financial service, and the collection of know your customer information in order that you can communicate with your customers, you know, when these sorts of things are occurring, and protect them. None of which is achieved by not knowing your customer and promoting that it's a benefit of not knowing, and not necessarily having the workflows similar to what they would expect in a regulated environment. And so I think that it was that active marketing that really pushed the CFTC over the edge. And they already had filed and settled a complaint against the founders, which was $250,000 kind of slap on the wrist. But the more aggressive remedies are being sought against all of these token holders that voted, which is quite concerning. And the the really tough thing is if they are prohibited by the injunctive relief from being involved in governance, they can't even vote or put a proposal up to engage a legal representative to mount their defence. Now, if they don't reply within this 28-day period, or none of them reply, the CFTC, the complaint sort of comes into effect. And that's the really scary thing of this lawmaking by enforcement actions when we don't have clear policy set at the government level. Nobody's really, they've just taken a punt to say that the best way to define this unincorporated association is by the members that voted. But it could have also been much wider or also much thinner. But it's sent shockwaves through the community because, for fear of being held liable. And the other thing that came up earlier, Nathan, was from me being in Paris this week, I've had literally sitting next to some advocates in Blockchain for Europe that are negotiating this EU MiCA regime. The money laundering proposal is that it seeks to clarify that DAOs and DeFi arrangements where the smart contracts and the voting is controlled directly or indirectly by natural or legal persons will be captured by existing law and then the intended law that comes in with MiCA. So it doesn't even rely on new law being introduced to clarify the requirement upon DAOs so sufficient decentralization is not a thing. And they're trying to set and clarify the principles that even if you have 100 global members or 1,000 global members, whether they voted or not, the DAO and the DeFi arrangements must comply. That's at least at the EU level. So yeah, very grim outlook in terms of functionally how do these DAOs do this, and even if they do collect the personal information, do they do it on chain? Does it get stored on the they have to be wary of their obligations under privacy law too, and to protect the cybersecurity of all of these individuals. So a number of blunt instruments seem to be being used to bring DeFi into the existing regulated net without sufficient flexibility for innovation around things like decentralized identity and zk-KYC, the privacy enhancing ways in which we might do KYC better and differently. Any reactions from the rest of the, I know we talked a little, but did you want to go through any other aspect in detail?
Was Ooki DAO, where was Ooki DAO registered? I'm only looking at it now.
It wasn't registered. It was.
Sorry, where was it? Where were the founders? Where were they?
In the US.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it just, Joni, to continue on from my point earlier, thanks for the background too there. What it seems is you've got two pieces of conflict here. So the Ooki DAO guys were really dumb, benefit of hindsight, but in planning, this really emphasises why you have to take the broader picture in your planning, and back to this design of the digital organisation in the first place that I talked about in the last session. But they opened the door here by trying to argue a case to say, oh, nothing to see here, all is fine, ignoring the fact that their antecedent organisation had harm from whatever form to consumers. Well, that is clearly something that a regulator is going to be interested in whatever way you want to look at it. So that then opens the door for the regulator to do the slap on the wrist. But it also says if there's either a combination of ignorance or desire for control here, that it just opens that door further to widen the net and create more intended or unintended consequences. So it's a real mess, but it really does underline why people have to really think things through from the get-go and have this multi-perspectival approach to how they do things, and not do dumb stuff like ignore what are clearly red rags to a bull.
And it ruins it for the rest of the industry, because the industry is fearful now. Even the ones that are trying to have a plan and to act well and protect their communities, it's not enough that, you know, they might be distant enough from regulatory scrutiny. It still spooks communities and growing communities, and the whole foundations of participatory governance, which is intended to have more engaged communities than a company facilitates, with, you know, the clear directors' duties and responsibilities that are managed often through hierarchies. So, yeah, it's a shame.
In Australia, would it be seen as promoting a scheme by the ACCC? Is that a similar? Would that be a similar regulatory response that we could see in Australia?
In terms of is voting promoting a scheme?
From the founders, and yeah,
I think they might be involved in promoting or arranging or dealing in relation to a financial product, if sort of an LP interest in the liquidity pool represents a financial product, or the whole thing is a managed investment scheme and should have been registered and therefore is unregistered and unlicensed. That could be an avenue, but again, if it's an association that is considered to be formed by persons in Australia, or at least partly in Australia, then you, in my view, you don't even get to the managed investment scheme or promoter provisions, because the actual organisation is illegal.
Yeah, okay.
And that's where it's a strict liability offence. And so if you compare it in that sense, CFTC, as aggressive as it is still nicer than the persons being convicted under this strict liability offence, as what would happen in Australia.
Rick earlier suggested registering companies overseas. Has that been considered for LawFi DAO?
Yeah, yes,
or a type
it
of
has.
trust. I can't remember the name of the trust, the type of trust.
There's a number of structures that are used across the British Virgin Islands, Panama, Cayman Islands, Guernsey, even so recently. Some of the Caribbean countries too. St. Nevis and Kitts was one of the ones used. So for the Bitcoin fund structures, not necessarily participatory things, building things, but as a tax lawyer and an international tax lawyer by training, I went through the Panama Papers reviews, probably, I don't know, it's like 10 years ago now. And I was scarred by that process, because when you structure involving a tax haven country, if something like the Panama Papers comes out where there's a leak of information, or in this case, you're not a DAO unless you've structured your foundation through one of those countries. If everyone's doing it, therefore I should do it, therefore it's okay. 10, 15 years later, you get caught up when the tax authorities do get around to getting the information and reviewing, and you're tainted with the brush of the bad actors that have used those jurisdictions for tax avoidance purposes, not for the good reasons of the regulatory and tax haven, whilst we are sorting out how the legal and tax rules clearly apply. So there are legitimate uses of those countries, but I also see a lot of not so explainable commercial reasons for use of those countries.
And it would take LawFi DAO away from its purpose, which is to try and clarify, navigate and establish good Australian law. So,
well, Australian and other law. But the other thing why I ruled it out initially is because from a tax perspective, you do still need economic substance over there. And so unless we had trusted members that were willing to be quite actively involved in these early stages.
And lived in those countries, perhaps.
That's right. That's right.
Like El Salvador or Panama or somewhere.
Yeah, then I mean, then it would have just been the exercise of bringing in those members now to say, okay, well, this structure doesn't work for tax purposes if you've had it, and that would have been its own educative exercise. But I did see, I put international structures in the bucket of sort of a next phase of establishment once we get through a base case of a very simple Australian majority formed unincorporated entity. Then we can get into the more exotic DAO structures. I was also trying to keep it simple for the regulators, which is its own exercise.
It would muddy the waters, wouldn't it, going international from the outset?
I think it does, but you raise a good point, because DAOs, you know, when you do launch your governance token pretty much from the get-go, you are naturally international, and that is a thing that a lot of unincorporated DAOs are dealing with, and not with good legal or tax support.
By members who want to be international as well, but are not like unprepared to pay tax in their own country if they earn income. So where's the tax leakage here?
Yeah, well, and so again, with our pay to rely model, it goes to whether the DAO is a form of public trading trust and a tax law company, or if we can have that true pass-through status where it's actually the member that's earning the income that is, you know, subject to pay tax on that income, and whether the other ventures, though the self-insurance pool, whether any of like income and maybe direct contributions are like capital contributions, not subject to assessable income, so to speak. But yeah, each sort of limb of the LawFi DAO model has its own tax analysis, and then we step back and we look at broadly if we group the insurance scheme with that fourth box. We don't really know what we're going to do with that revenue. What does it become if I look at those two together, or all of it together? How do we characterize it for tax purposes? And actually that's the exercise that's flown through in the Board of Tax submission, which will be submitted next week. It goes through, like, from a tax perspective, there's the struggles that we're having in characterization of the entity, and then the tokens as things that are issued by the entity or subject to
Justin Wibrow, or to others.
Welcome, Justin. So that submission will also be shared publicly, and we could use it as the topic for discussion as well for our own tax treatment of our activities. I forgot to mention as well that we've finally had acknowledgement from the Australian Business Register of the objection in relation to the entitlement for an ABN. So a case officer will be appointed in the next week or two, or so, I understand. And again, we can finally start engaging with those tension points with the ABN.
Great. They can come on the adventure.
That's right. And a similar request will go out to them as to whether, as an organisation or any of the representatives, can be involved with an appropriate framework in the DAO. Yeah, so I think that it may seem like we are going slow. The effort on the submissions and the policy front has been heavy over these last few weeks on the Australian front, but also with the UK Law Commission and the World Economic Forum and this OECD Global Blockchain Policy Forum. There's September and October in blockchain world is always heavy on the policy front for some reason. And so the benefit of putting all of that thinking around the application of existing legal and tax rule and where the DAO, Web3 industry is going, and therefore where the policy may need to support. All of that thinking is starting to be reflected in these submissions, and most of which will be available from next week for reading and then further discussion. Nathan, did you want to read out your comments? I'm just not being able to see them properly. Oh. It's
nothing very special. It's just I said maybe that there's, because there are so many conferences right now with a lot of references to regulation. There's just often these months are very heavily weighted towards policy and debate around policy for that reason. I don't know. I'm trying, it's not really relevant. I'm just trying to figure out why it might be the case that there is so much discussion at these times, because every single CEO, I guess, at every company who's speaking about their roadmap is also speaking about the legal and regulatory concerns of the roadmap, and then it ends up being policy the whole time. So it's interesting, but that's probably the reason. No, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud now. I'm going to stop.
No, it's great. Well, and sorry, the other big announcement that's sort of come out is the Gary Gensler assertion that the US has jurisdictional nexus over the Ethereum blockchain now, because at least a 40% majority of the validators are based there following the merge, the switch from proof of work to proof of stake. Now, my thinking, but it's not thinking that is aligned around the world, that it's contentious. I think that when we seek to identify and define DAOs, it should also include the blockchain level DAOs. and it makes most sense to me to explain the first DAO as the Bitcoin network. And a lot of the international policy standard setters, the definitions that they're proposing could very well capture Bitcoin. So I'm trying to bring that to the fore. The issue, though, is if the US seeks to have regulatory jurisdiction over the Ethereum network, I still don't think that works for tax purposes. And so if we haven't holistically considered policy on how we govern and regulate and tax DAOs as these global beings, I think that the fight could even be taken out of our hands, in terms of industry versus regulators and governments. It could be regulator against regulator in terms of jurisdiction. So I expect that to play out. And the key issue there is we still don't know if multiple people around the world being involved in governance or validating or mining constitute taxable permanent establishments everywhere. So that may be how the tax laws could operate, but it's really quite completely opposite to the economic reality, because a Bitcoin miner that wins a Bitcoin block reward, a lot of them are reporting that as income and paying the tax on that income in the jurisdiction that they're based. But when you break it down, the tax laws operate on this principle of tax that where the value is created. The winning miner is not the sole person responsible for creating the value. They can only win a block or mine a block once enough miners have contributed the hash power. And then they reach the difficulty, and then sort of the miner that produces the winning algorithm, they win the block. But all of that effort is actually required, and it happens around the globe before someone can win. And no miner is going to want to say, well, we recognize that the value is created around the world, and therefore we will share some of our Bitcoin mining rewards. That won't happen. But from a tax perspective, we just get to these really awkward outcomes when effort of a global community is required before something can actually be earned or derived, I should say.
So we need a new global tax act for the digital economy.
Yeah, and this, you'll appreciate this, Electra. About 5 years ago, I put a submission into the OECD with their base erosion profit shifting work, and one of the streams was the taxation issues of the digitalizing economy. But
I would love to read that. When I did my Master of International Tax, I contemplated a world tax system before I'd heard of Bitcoin. And and I wish I'd heard of Bitcoin when I tried to write it, because it would make sense. But I would love to read that and pursue that kind of
happy to share it
solution.
But it's still, because the scope was quite narrow and defined to the Web 2 issues, so the digital services being provided by the likes of Google, Facebook, now Meta, and so forth, that was too much of a big issue to widen the scope to, at that time, what was still quite a small market cap issue.
Yes.
And so it just got effectively ignored. And
but it could be built on at this point. So when it's regulator versus regulator, it could be offered as a compromise, some new model of taxation that would help us all get along.
Yeah, it will have to. It will have to.
Okay, so outside the scope of what we need to do in establishing this DAO, but
well, no, I think
is it not?
Well, maybe not in the immediate scope, but it will, as we bring more global jurisdictions in, and if regulators and policymakers can be members, even observatory members, finally they might get a sense of, hey, if they are the human in the loop, if they're providing node support, if we're basing all of ourselves on the Ethereum blockchain and they get dashboards to see LawFi DAO transactions and also receive real-time alerts of anything that might be suspicious, it cuts out this need for me or any officer to provide a suspicious matter report if they get the direct feed of data. But that also applies from a tax perspective too. If they can directly see the income flows, the pay to rely, the insurance payouts, they can already get a sense of real-time spending and earning of our DAO.
I think that's just not what they're understanding, where the flow of value is, and that it's not concentrated. It's such a leap of understanding. So if we were to map and visualize that would, as you say.
And that's what's missing. So a number of these global and national based responsible blockchain adoption advocacy bodies, they're saying there's no reg DAO that regulators can safely play in to really get the detail and the understanding, the experience.
So you need a reg DAO and a tax DAO.
Which may be sub DAOs of LawFi DAO, or we may
plug them in. We're plugged into the reg DAO and tax DAO. Carry on.
That's right. So it's a concept that is gaining a lot of traction because we can't leave our regulators behind either.
And we do need them to play a role.
Exactly. And so the last item of discussion, it is in the theme of moving slow, but with regulator engagement, is in Australia we've had the Digital Finance CRC and the RBA launch the CBDC white paper and the call for experiments. So I was wondering if that would be an item worthy of scope within the Establishment Committee work for us to submit a use case to the Digital Finance CRC and say, if there was an Aussie CBDC available for retail use, how might that make it easier for LawFi DAO to comply, and to access Australian government services and pay taxes, manage payments. So it would be more from the perspective of how we manage our membership payment fees coming into our treasury, and if we were taxable and if we received the funds in CBDC, could we have our own smart contract where it automatically routes the tax to the ATO or to the RBA account?
Really interesting. Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Joni, I've read that paper, and I think there's some opportunity there, but I think we'd need to partner up with. It's very technology focused, very technology focused, so it doesn't have a lot of real world type application outside of Nerdsville, right? So we need to find somebody. I'm looking at you, Nathan, as our conduit to Nerdsville. to find the right party to work with, but I think in that sense it would be worthwhile, and it's pretty. There's not a long time to put it together. They're looking for submissions and hands up of activities over the next month or so, and they want to have all this concluded by April next year. So it's not a long time. So there's a committee, I believe, that has been set up to filter through and analyse the applications to go in and processes that people want to play with. The intent is to look at that presumably in November, given they want everything in by end of October, and then get on with it. And the principle is it's being operated and overseen by the Reserve Bank. They will issue an electronic token for the purposes of the exercise. There's a whole lot of rules about how they get burnt at the end and all that sort of stuff, which is fine. So, but there is definitely a structure there, but we're going to need a technology partner to work with.
And it very clearly states that, very, very minimal support will be provided by the Digital Finance CRC team. So you need to be resourced in order to participate, which is its own effort. But I'm not, I feel that if we asked, we could get a sponsor or a partner arrangement of some sort. It's just what would be the use case that we want to put up to ensure that DAOs are considered as part of, one of the use cases of the work to better engage with the existing monetary system. Yeah,
it was encouraging to see the Reserve Bank saying and stating quite clearly that they had no intention of this eradicating cash from Australia. So not yet, anyway. So that was interesting. It's while consumers want it, it's still going to be available.
Do you know the funny thing? I actually saw the prototype banknote that actually is the physical representation of the Swiss CBDC.
I saw that today. That's how they'll do it. They'll just have a paper banknote that is linked to a CBDC.
Yeah,
amazing.
So it's blurring the lines of what actually is paper cash. But all right, if I'll just do one final call for hands up. Any other topics of interest for today? Items that you'd like to put on the agenda for next week, other than the normal course of our activities?
I'd like the conundrum that I'm seeing, Joni, that I don't know whether the forum's right for next week, but one of the things I'd like to break down is how 3.2.3 in the white paper, which is about the equitable decisions piece and incorporating everybody. I think the breadth of vision there is good, but then the practical application of how that works and how that actually flies in the face of a DAO is equitable in the fact that it can have anybody doing anything with no discrimination, providing they're substrated into a particular member class that has particular rights and obligations. So it's a real conundrum as to how that all works. Anyway, yeah.
Let's table that for next week, because it is its own, I think, full session to go through. Well, thank you, each of you, and look forward to the discussion next week. Have a great weekend.
See ya.
Bye.